load shift. Once you look for your leaks and your leans, you go to the top of the truck. You want to look at the top of your truck. You want to look at your clearance lights at the top. You want to make sure your clearance lights are properly mounted and secure, not cracked, bent, or broken. All the nuts and bolts are present and tight. You want to make sure that your clearance lights are the proper color. They should be amber. Then from your clearance lights, you can move down to your mirrors. You come down to your mirrors. You want to check, make sure your mirrors are solid. You want to make sure that they're properly mounted and secure. They're not cracked, bent, or broken. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. From your mirrors, you're going to go to your windshield. You want to look at your windshield. You want to make sure it's properly mounted and secure, not cracked, bent, or broken. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. You want to make sure there are no cracks in your mirrors or on your windows. And you also want to make sure that your windows are free of any illegal stickers. From your windows, you come down to your windshield wipers. Your windshield wipers are properly mounted and secure, not cracked, bent, or broken. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. Your windshield wipers are made out of rubber, so there can be no abrasions, no bubbles, no cuts, and no dry rot on your windshield wiper. From your windshield wipers, you can move down. You come down here. You come down here to your left and your right headlights. Your left and right headlight. They are properly mounted and secure, not cracked, bent, or broken. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. These are a high and a low beam. You want to make sure that what's special about them, you want to make sure that they're clear in color and they're clean. Then you go to your left and your right marker lights. These are a marker, turn signal, reflector, and a flasher. They are properly mounted and secure. They're not cracked, bent, or broken. All the nuts and bolts are present and tight. What's special about them, you want to make sure they're clean. As with any light or any glass on the truck, it has to be clean and they have to be the proper color. The marker lights should be amber in color. From your headlights and your marker lights, you're going to move down to your license plate. Your license plate is properly mounted and secure, not cracked, bent, or broken. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. Special about your license plate, you just want to make sure it's current and up to date. This is a municipal government, so it is a permanent plate. From there, we can move underneath the hood. Pop the hood. Come over here to this side. Come over to this side. This is your unique side. When I do my pre-trip, I usually start at the top and I work my way to the bottom. So right at the top, first thing I come to is my coolant reservoir. My coolant reservoir is properly mounted and secure, not cracked, bent, or broken. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. What's special about the coolant reservoir? Well, it has coolant in it. You want to make sure it's not leaking. There's rubber hoses coming off of the coolant reservoir. You want to make sure there are no abrasions, no bubbles, no cuts, or dry rot on the hoses. And you also want to make sure that your hoses are connected. You also want to make sure that your cap is hand tight and that you are in the proper fill range between max and add. From your coolant reservoir, you come back, you come to your exhaust. This is your exhaust right here. Your exhaust is properly mounted and secure, not cracked, bent, or broken. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. What's special about your exhaust is you want to look for any black soot marks that would indicate a leak. From your exhaust, you move to your windshield washer reservoir. Your windshield washer reservoir is properly mounted and secure, not cracked, bent, or broken. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. You want to make sure your cap is on. What's special about it is your windshield washer reservoir holds a fluid and it cannot be leaking, and it should be properly serviced between minimum and maximum, or should have coolant in it, or windshield washer fluid in it. From your windshield washer reservoir, you come down here. This red thing right here that I'm pointing at is the water pump. The water pump is properly mounted and secure, not cracked, bent, or broken. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. What's special about the water pump? Well, it holds water, so it cannot be leaking. There are rubber hoses coming to and from the water pump. You want to make sure that they are not leaking. There are no abrasions, no bubbles, no cuts, or no dry rot. They're fastened at each end properly. Also, what's special about your water pump is belt driven. Right here is the belt for your water pump right there. You want to make sure that your belt has no abrasions, no bubbles, no cuts, and no dry rot on it. Okay, from your water pump, you're going to come up to your alternator. Your alternator is right here. You want to make sure that your alternator is properly mounted and secure, not cracked, bent, or broken. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. What's special about your alternator is you want to look for your wires and stuff. You want to make sure that there are no arc marks on your wires indicating a short. You also want to look at your alternator itself to make sure there are no black marks on it that would indicate a short. From your alternator, you come to your alternator belt. Your alternator belt should have no more than 3/4 of an inch of play on it. The belt is made out of rubber. The belt should have no abrasions, no bubbles, no cuts, no dry rot. From there, you look, there is nothing else on this side. Radiator, alternator, water pump, exhaust, windshield washer reservoir. Now we'll go to the other side. You come to this side, just like the other side. Start at the top, work your way to the bottom. Well, there's really nothing up here that you got to talk about. So I'm going to come into my motor. This right here is called your air pump or your air compressor. And hooked directly to it is your power steering pump. The way to find your power steering pump, look at your power steering gearbox or your power steering reservoir and follow the hose. And it goes right over into this. So this is your air pump, and always connected to your air pump is your power steering pump. These two pumps are properly mounted and secure, not cracked, bent, or broken. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. The air pump and the power steering pump both hold, the air pump holds air, power steering pump holds fluid. They cannot be leaking. The power steering and the air pump are gear driven. The power steering pump has hoses coming to it, so there cannot be any abrasions, bubbles, cuts, or dry rot on the hoses, and they also cannot be leaking. Okay, so from inside the motor, we also have our oil fill, and over here is our oil check. To check the oil, you pull the dipstick out, you wipe the dipstick off, stick it back in, pull it back out. Do not add oil unless it is low and it's down to the add mark. And right over here is where you would add your oil. From there, we're moving out of the motor. We're going to come start doing our steering components. First component I come to is my steering shaft. My steering shaft should have no more than a quarter turn of play. Steering shaft has a lower and an upper universal joint. You want to make sure that they're properly lubricated. Also, the steering shaft has to be properly mounted and secure, not cracked, bent, or broken. All nuts and bolts present and tight. From our steering shaft, we're going to come down to our steering gearbox. This is our steering gearbox. It is properly mounted and secure, not cracked, bent, or broken. All nuts and bolts present and tight. Steering gearbox has a fluid in it. It cannot be leaking. Also has hoses coming off of it, and they cannot be leaking, and they can have no abrasions, bubbles, cuts, or dry rot. From our steering gearbox, I'm going to go to the steering components, and there's a couple of these. So this right here is your pitman arm. This right here is your drag link. This right here is your upper control arm right here. Down in behind here, a little hard to see up here, is your lower control arm, and this right here is your tie rod. All right, and on these other things, you have a few other items. Right here, you have a castle nut and a cotter pin and a ball joint on the back side. All right, and you have a castle nut and a cotter pin here also. Castle nut, cotter pin, and a ball joint. All those are properly mounted and secure, not cracked, bent, or broken. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. What's special about it? You want to make sure your ball joints are properly lubricated. All right, from there, we're going to come to the suspension. You have your suspension. This is your suspension. There's a couple parts here. You have your front leaf spring mount up in here. Your rear leaf spring mount is clear back in there. You have your leaf spring right here. You have your two U-bolts. Here's a U-bolt, and right here's a U-bolt. And then you have a shock. Here's your shock with an upper shock mount up here and a lower shock mount. All those items are properly mounted and secure, not cracked, bent, or broken. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. Special about the suspension is you want to look at your leaf springs. You want to make sure your leaf springs are not cracked. You want to make sure they're directly on top of each other. You also want to check your U-bolts. You want to look in this area right here for looseness. Any kind of shiny marks will indicate, or rust will indicate, a looseness. Also, your shock holds a gas or a liquid, and it cannot be leaking. Okay, from there, we're going to go to our brake system. Our brake system consists of a bunch of different parts too, and we're going to break this down into 2 parts, 3 parts, or 2 parts, 4 parts, and 2 more parts. First 2 parts I come to, airline and the brake chamber. The airline and the brake chamber are properly mounted and secure, not cracked, bent, or broken. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. The airline is made out of rubber, so there cannot be any abrasions, bubbles, cuts, or dry rot. And the air chamber itself, which is a single brake chamber, it cannot be leaking air along with the airline. From the brake chamber, we're going to move into the other parts. This part right here is called a slack adjuster. This part right here is your clevis pin that goes through. This clevis pin right here that my hand's on. And then what holds it in place is the cotter pin. And this is the push rod right here. So you have your slack adjuster, cotter pin, clevis pin goes through, and your push rod. They are all properly mounted and secure, not cracked, bent, or broken. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. What is special about this, with the brakes released, you should not be able to get a hold of this and pull that more than 1 inch. If you can move it more than 1 inch, your brakes are out of adjustment. They need adjusted. From your slack adjuster and cotter pin and clevis pin pusher rod, you come down here, you can't see it, but your brake pad and drum, this is your drum. You can't see the pad, it's in behind there. But this is your brake drum and your brake pad. They are properly mounted and secure, not cracked, bent, or broken. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. What's special about the drum and pad? Well, you want to make sure that the drum has no illegal fixes on it. You want to make sure that your drum and pad are free of oil, grease, or any debris. And your pad needs to have at least 1/4 of an inch of pad left. Coming from there, come out to here. Going to go to our tire. When you're talking about your tire, you want to talk about TCP, tread, condition, pressure. So first off, we're going to talk about the tread. Well, you want to look at your tread. Since this is a front tire, your tread should be evenly worn. It needs a minimum of 4/32 tread depth. They cannot be a recap tire, but they can be a radial or a bias ply tire. But they have to be all radial. This tire and that tire on the other side has to be a radial or a bias. It cannot be a bias tire here and a radial over there. It has to be either all radial or all biased. So that's your tread. Then you go to your condition. Well, it's made out of rubber, so there is no abrasions, no bubbles, no cuts, no dry rot on the outside and on the inside of the tire. No cuts, no marks or anything. Then you go to your pressure. Your pressure is stated on your tire somewhere how much pressure they want you to run. Or if it's not stated on the tire somewhere, the company might have you run something different, and it'll be marked somewhere on the rim or on the tire somewhere stating a different pressure. How do you check the tire pressure? Well, if it's a back tire, you can give it a kick, or you use a tire gauge to tell you the exact pressure inside the tire. From your tire, you come to your rim. Your rim is properly mounted and secure, not cracked, bent, or broken. All nuts and bolts are present tight. Your rim, you want to look for anything, any cracks or anything like that. There can be no illegal fixes on this rim. The way it comes from the factory is the way it has to be. Also with your rim, you want to look at your lug nuts. Your lug nuts are all properly mounted and secure, not cracked, bent, or broken. All nuts and bolts are present tight. What's special about them is you want to look for rush trails. That will indicate a loose lug nut. Either rush trails or shiny marks behind the lug nuts. That will indicate a loose wheel. From the lug nuts, we're going to go to our valve stem, which is right here. Your valve stem is properly mounted and secure, not cracked, bent, or broken. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. You want to make sure that it is a metal valve stem with a metal cap. And this is where you would check your tire pressure. From there, you would go in behind this cap right here. This is called your hub. Your hub is properly mounted and secure, not cracked, bent, or broken. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. There is a hub seal there, so you want to make sure that it is not leaking any fluid. To check your hub, it's either got a sight glass where you could see how much fluid's in it, or a cap. And if you want to check with the cap, you pull the cap off, you stick your finger in, and it should come to your first knuckle. From your tire, move back. You're going to go to this light right here. That light right there is just a turn signal and a flasher. It is properly mounted and secure, not cracked, bent, or broken. All nuts and bolts are present tight. It is amber in color. All right, from there we move down. We're going to go to our door. What we're going to do is we're going to open our door. We're going to check our hinges to make sure our hinges is in place. We want to make sure that our door is properly mounted and secure, not cracked, bent, or broken. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. You also want to look at your door. You want to make sure the door seal is in place. You want to make sure that the door seal, since it's made out of rubber, has no abrasions, no bubbles, no cuts, no dry rot on it. You also want to make sure that your door closes and opens and stays shut. From your door, you're going to come down to your fuel tank. Your fuel tank is properly mounted and secure, not cracked, bent, or broken. All nuts and bolts are present and tight. Your fuel tank holds a liquid, so it cannot be leaking. Your fuel tank also has straps around it that hold the tank on. You want to make sure they're properly mounted and secure, not cracked, bent, or broken. All nuts and bolts are present tight. You also have vibration isolator straps, and you want to make sure that they are properly mounted and secure, not cracked, bent, or broken. All nuts and bolts are present and tight.